At a Christmas party, I discovered my wife's infidelity, a revelation that shocked everyone. What I did next was something no one could have anticipated. In the heart of a softly lit ballroom, amidst the jingle of Christmas carols and the merry chatter of partygoers, Thaddeus stood with a glass of red wine in his hand. The annual Christmas party of his company was in full swing, the air thick with the scent of pine and the warmth of holiday spirit. He scanned the room, his eyes seeking Zephyrine, his wife of 7 years. There she was, laughing, her green dress shimmering like the Christmas tree in the corner of the room. Thaddeus smiled, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. Zephyrine was always the life of any gathering, her laughter infectious, her energy boundless. He made his way through the crowd, intending to surprise her with a gentle kiss. But as he neared, a sight caught him off guard. Zephyrine, usually so open and radiant, seemed different, her laughter not as light, her gestures more guarded. Curious, Thaddeus paused behind a cluster of his colleagues, just out of sight. He watched as Zephyrine leaned in closer to Mark, his colleague from the marketing department. Their heads were tilted together, sharing a secret joke perhaps, but something in their body language suggested more. A pang of unease twisted in Thaddeus's stomach. Determined to dismiss his doubts, Thaddeus stepped forward. But just then, Mark whispered something in Zephyrine's ear, and she blushed, a reaction Thaddeus had thought was reserved for their intimate moments. His heart sank. The room's festive cheer, the twinkling lights, the laughter, all seemed to fade into a dull background hum. Thaddeus felt as though he was watching them through a thick pane of glass, disconnected, distant. He turned away, the taste of the wine turning bitter in his mouth. Thoughts swirled in his head, each one a stinging reminder of what he had just seen. Had he been blind to something in his own marriage? Was there a hidden layer to Zephyrine that he had never known? The questions pounded in his head with every heartbeat. Thaddeus sought refuge in a quiet corner, his mind replaying the scene over and over. He watched other couples at the party, laughing and dancing, their joy a stark contrast to the turmoil within him. He felt a stranger in a world he once knew. Eventually, Zephyrine found him, her face alight with the evening's excitement. "There you are," she exclaimed, her voice a melody that once soothed his soul. "Why are you hiding here?" Thaddeus forced a smile, masking the storm inside. "Just needed a quiet moment," he lied, the words tasting like ash. Zephyrine, seemingly oblivious to his inner turmoil, took his hand. "Come on, let's dance," she urged, pulling him towards the dance floor. As they danced, Thaddeus couldn't help but feel the distance between them, a chasm that had opened silently, unseen yet deeply felt. He held Zephyrine close, her familiar scent, the softness of her hair, but it all seemed different now. A nagging voice in his head whispered doubts, feeding his insecurities. The evening drew to a close, and they made their way home, the car ride filled with Zephyrines' cheerful recounting of the party. Thaddeus responded with nods and half-smiles, his mind a whirlpool of emotions. Once they were home, as Zephyrine drifted to sleep, Thaddeus lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the image of Zephyrine and Mark etched in his mind. He realized then that this Christmas party had unwrapped a truth he wasn't prepared for, a reality that threatened the very foundation of his marriage. And as the clock ticked towards midnight, Thaddeus knew one thing for certain: his life would never be the same again. The days following the Christmas party passed in a blur for Thaddeus. He went through the motions of daily life, his interactions with Zephyrine marked by a superficial normality that masked the turmoil churning inside him. Sleep eluded him, and when it did come, it was restless and filled with unsettling dreams. Each morning, Thaddeus watched Zephyrine, searching for signs, clues that might reveal more about her affair. But she remained her usual self, vibrant, affectionate, seemingly unaware of the storm she had ignited in his heart. It was this facade that made it all the more painful for Thaddeus. The trust and openness he had always believed defined their relationship now felt like a distant memory. As the days turned into a week, an idea began to take shape in Thaddeus's mind. It was a thought that initially surfaced as a fleeting shadow, dismissed as quickly as it appeared. But as the reality of his wife's betrayal settled deeper, the shadow grew, taking form and substance. If Zephyrin could betray their vows so easily, why should he be the one to uphold them? The idea was simple yet daring, to have an affair of his own. Not just any affair, but one with someone close to Zephyrin, someone whose involvement would ensure she felt the sting of betrayal as acutely as he did. The perfect candidate soon became apparent: Azalea, Zephyrin's closest friend. Azalea, with her quick wit and warm smile, had always been a pleasant presence in their lives. But now, Thaddeus saw her in a different light, as a means to an end. The plan was set in motion with a casual invitation. Thaddeus reached out to Azalea under the guise of seeking advice on a surprise gift for Zephyrin. Azalea, unsuspecting and ever helpful, agreed to meet for coffee. As Thaddeus sat across from Azalea in the quaint downtown cafe, he felt a twinge of guilt. Azalea was a kind soul, and here he was, about to use her for his vendetta. Yet, as he conversed with her, laughing at her jokes and sharing stories, he felt a strange exhilaration. It was a game of shadows and deceptions, and he was the orchestrator. Their meetings became more frequent, and with each encounter, Thaddeus carefully laid the groundwork for his plan. He was charming, attentive, gradually blurring the lines between friendly banter and flirtation. Azalea, initially cautious, began to respond to his advances. Thaddeus could sense the moment when their relationship shifted from platonic to something more. It was a point of no return. In the midst of this deceitful dance, Thaddeus often found himself pausing, questioning the morality of his actions. But the image of Zephyrin and Mark at the Christmas party would flash in his mind, reigniting the ember of betrayal and hardening his resolve. As Thaddeus and Azalea's relationship deepened, he meticulously orchestrated their encounters, choosing places and times where they were likely to be seen. It was only a matter of time before word got back to Zephyrin. The thrill of the affair mixed with the anticipation of Zephyrin's discovery created a potent cocktail that kept Thaddeus in a constant state of heightened emotion. He knew the revelation would shatter the fragile veneer of their marriage, but he was past the point of caring about consequences. In his mind, the scales of justice needed to be balanced, and he was the one to tip them. The day of reckoning arrived sooner than Thaddeus had anticipated. It was an ordinary Tuesday evening when Zephyrin confronted him. The setting sun cast long shadows in their living room, mirroring the dark turn their conversation was about to take. "Thaddeus, we need to talk," Zephyrin said, her voice steady but her eyes betraying a storm of emotions. He could tell she was trying to maintain composure, the way her fingers nervously twisted a strand of her hair. He sat down, bracing himself for the conversation he knew was inevitable. "What's on your mind, Zephyrin?" "It's about you and Azalea." The words hung in the air, heavy with accusation and hurt. "People have seen you together, Thaddeus. They're talking. Is it true?" Thaddeus met her gaze, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was it, the moment of truth. "Yes, it's true," he admitted, his voice a mix of defiance and resignation. The confession hit Zephyrin like a physical blow. She recoiled slightly, as if the words had manifested into something tangible. "Why, Thaddeus? Why her? Why at all?" He could see the pain in her eyes, a reflection of the anguish he had felt since the Christmas party. "I saw you with Mark," he said, the words laced with bitterness. "At the party. I know about your affair." The revelation struck Zephyrin silent. Her face drained of color, and for a moment, she seemed to shrink before him. "Thaddeus, I..." Her voice trailed off, unable to find the words. The room was thick with tension, each grappling with the weight of their betrayals. The silence was broken by Zephyrin's soft sobs. Thaddeus watched her, a part of him wanting to reach out and comfort her, another part angry and vindicated. As Zephyrin regained her composure, a fragile conversation ensued. They talked, not just about the affairs, but about their marriage. It was a painful dissection of years of unspoken frustrations, unmet expectations, and neglected emotions. They uncovered truths about their relationship, about how they had drifted apart, each lost in their own world. "It's like we've been living a lie," Zephyrine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "How did we end up here, Thaddeus?" He didn't have an answer for her. The truth was complex, tangled in years of complacency and unspoken truths. They had been living side by side, yet miles apart in every way that mattered. As the conversation drew to a close, a heavy realization settled over them. Their marriage, once a source of joy and comfort, had become a facade. The love they once shared, now buried under layers of deceit and resentment. They sat in silence, the weight of their revelations hanging between them. Outside, the night had fallen, the darkness enveloping their home like a shroud. Inside, Thaddeus and Zephyrine were left to ponder the ruins of their marriage, each lost in their own thoughts, each wondering what the future held for them. In the wake of their mutual confessions, Thaddeus and Zephyrine found themselves navigating an unfamiliar terrain. Their home, once a haven of warmth and love, had transformed into a silent battleground of unspoken words and avoided glances. The air was thick with the residue of their hurt and betrayal. As days rolled into weeks, Thaddeus grappled with a myriad of emotions. The initial rush of his retaliatory affair had faded, leaving in its wake a deep sense of emptiness. Guilt gnawed at him, not just for the pain he had caused Zephyrine but also for dragging Azalea into his vengeful plot. He realized that his affair, though sparked by hurt, had been a misguided attempt to fill a void that had long existed in their marriage. Meanwhile, Zephyrine, who had always been the more vocal of the two, retreated into a shell. The revelation of her affair, coupled with the shock of Thaddeus's response, had left her introspective and quiet. She moved through the days like a ghost, her once vibrant spirit dimmed by the shadow of their crumbling relationship. In a mutual, unspoken agreement, they began attending counseling sessions. Seated in the neutral territory of the therapist's office, they slowly began to peel back the layers of their discontent. The sessions were often tense, filled with painful admissions and bitter truths. Yet, each session ended with a small step towards understanding, not just of each other, but of themselves. Thaddeus learned about the loneliness Zephyrine had felt in their marriage, a loneliness that had made her vulnerable to Mark's attention. He heard her speak of her needs and desires, things he had been too preoccupied to notice. Listening to her, he realized how far he had strayed from being the partner she needed. Zephyrine, in turn, heard about Thaddeus's sense of inadequacy, how he had felt overshadowed by her larger-than-life personality. She learned of his struggles to communicate his feelings, leading to a chasm of misunderstanding between them. Through these sessions, they also confronted the reality of their affairs. Thaddeus expressed his remorse for involving Azalea, acknowledging the unfairness of using her as a pawn in his hurt. Azalea, feeling betrayed and used, had distanced herself, leaving Thaddeus to grapple with the consequences of his actions. For Zephyrine, the affair with Mark, now ended, served as a painful reflection of her unaddressed unhappiness. She realized it had been a misguided search for something that was missing in her life, something she hadn't been able to articulate until now. As they continued their therapy, a transformation began to take place. The raw wounds of their betrayals slowly started to heal, giving way to a cautious understanding. They began to communicate more openly, sharing their thoughts and feelings with a vulnerability they had never allowed before. The journey was far from easy. There were setbacks and days when the hurt seemed too deep to ever fully heal. Yet, with each session, with each honest conversation, they found themselves shedding the layers of resentment and misunderstanding that had shrouded their relationship for years. In this newfound space of openness, Thaddeus and Zephyrine began to rediscover each other. They started to see the person they had fallen in love with, the person who had been obscured by the tumult of unspoken grievances and neglected needs. As they navigated this complex path of healing and understanding, they realized that their marriage, though deeply scarred, still held a glimmer of hope. A hope that perhaps, from the ashes of their broken past, they could build something new and stronger. As autumn turned to winter, bringing with it a chill that seeped into the bones, Thaddeus and Zephyrine found themselves at a crossroads. The weeks of counseling and heart-to-heart conversations had laid bare the truths of their marriage. They had journeyed through the storm of their emotions, from the tumultuous waves of anger and betrayal to the calmer seas of understanding and forgiveness. Yet, even as they navigated these waters, a fundamental question remained unanswered: could their marriage survive? One evening, as they sat in their living room, the silence between them was not oppressive as it had once been, but rather contemplative. The Christmas tree stood in the corner, its lights twinkling softly, a stark contrast to the previous year's celebration that had set their current predicament in motion. "Zephyrine," Thaddeus began, his voice hesitant, "I've been thinking a lot about us, about everything we've been through." Zephyrine nodded, her eyes meeting his. There was a weariness in them, a fatigue born of emotional turmoil. "I have too, Thaddeus. It feels like we've been on this endless journey." Thaddeus took a deep breath, the words he had been rehearsing in his mind suddenly difficult to articulate. "I believe we've tried our best. We've delved into the depths of our marriage, confronted our demons. But I can't help feeling that maybe our paths have diverged too far to ever truly converge again." Zephyrine's expression didn't change, but he saw the slight tightening of her lips, the only sign of her internal struggle. "I've felt it too," she admitted softly. "We've grown, both of us, but perhaps not together. Maybe we've grown apart instead." The acknowledgement hung in the air, a painful truth they had both skirted around. Thaddeus felt a mix of relief and sorrow. Relief that they were finally voicing these thoughts, and sorrow for the end it signified. "Do you think?" Zephyrine voice faltered, "Do you think it's time for us to let go?" The question, though expected, hit Thaddeus with a force he hadn't anticipated. Letting go meant the end of their shared dreams, their plans, their life together. Yet, clinging to a relationship that had lost its essence seemed a disservice to the love they once shared. "I think so," Thaddeus replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think it's time for us to step forward, separately. To find our happiness, not as a couple, but as individuals." Tears brimmed in Zephyrines' eyes, and this time, Thaddeus reached out to hold her hand. It was a gesture of comfort, of shared sorrow, and of gratitude for the years they had spent together. In the weeks that followed, they navigated the process of divorce with a mutual respect that had been rekindled through their counseling sessions. It was an amicable separation, devoid of the bitterness that had initially fueled their actions. As Thaddeus packed his belongings, he felt a sense of melancholy. This was not the outcome he had envisioned on his wedding day, but life, he had learned, was unpredictable and often led down paths one never intended to take. Standing at the threshold of their once shared home, Thaddeus and Zephyrine shared a final embrace. It was a goodbye to their marriage, but also an acknowledgement of the growth and understanding they had gained. "Goodbye, Zephyrine," Thaddeus said, a lump forming in his throat. "Goodbye, Thaddeus." "Be happy," she replied, her voice laced with a sad resolve. With a final glance at the home that had housed their joys and sorrows, Thaddeus stepped out into the cold winter air. The chapter of Thaddeus and Zephyrine had closed, but the story of their individual journeys was just beginning.